What is up, guys? Welcome back to the Kick-Ass Podcast. As always, I hope you have had a stupendous week and weekend so far. Today's show is a little stacked, looking at the notes in the lineup that I have written down here, and previewing an even busier week coming up next week, which I'll get into a little bit later. But to me, today's show, I'm just gonna get right into it and start off with WWE and then hit on AEW later on. But today it was pretty much a no-brainer with what I was gonna start with and what has to be the biggest news as of right now, especially coming out of SmackDown. If you guys have seen it, if you've been on Twitter or have not been on social media, I of course will fill you in here now and give you my opinion. But first, I do want to say thank you guys as always for the download and for listening. The show is continuing to grow, and it's super cool to see, and super cool to see all the new areas around the world that the show is hitting, and where you guys are listening at, and it's very cool, and I appreciate it as always. There's a ton of wrestling podcasts out there. I know I listen to a lot of them myself, so the fact that you guys throw me in your lineup there and in your feed, I definitely appreciate it. And thoughts and prayers to everyone in Ukraine and everything with that situation. I'm not going to get into it too much here, but, you know, I'd be remiss if I kind of went on without acknowledging that and everything that's happening over there. And it's sad and it's scary, you know, and I can only imagine what they're dealing with over there. You sometimes forget how good you have it here, or I'll speak for myself, how good I have it here. Being in the U.S. and things that we don't necessarily have to worry about on the day-to-day basis. And it's crazy, you know, it's crazy that in 2022 we're still fighting with each other to this extent. But like I said, I'm not going to get too much into it, but I did just want to send a quick shout out and thoughts to everyone going through the unimaginable right now. But on a lighter note, like I said, I was going to start off the pod here with what I am personally most excited and looking forward to this coming week, and that was the announcement that was made on SmackDown by Pat McAfee himself that he has locked in Vincent Kennedy McMahon on the Pat McAfee Show, which is his show that he does on YouTube daily. I believe it's Monday through Friday from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time at least. He will have Vince McMahon himself live in studio. And first of all, guys, I don't know what kind of like Jedi powers Pat McAfee possesses in order to lock in this interview. It's the last time Vince has done something like this was with Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that was in studio. Of course, that was WWE Studios and WWE produced and owned, obviously. So the fact that Vince is, first of all, going to be in studio and on site to do this interview is pretty surreal to me, and big, because Vince just doesn't do stuff like this. Now, maybe they're in that area for a show and it just made sense, but regardless, you know, like, he still doesn't do stuff like this, especially nowadays. And the fact that it's with Pat McAfee is so interesting to me because I think, first of all, Pat McAfee is one of those personalities where you either love him or you hate him. Because for me, I love him. I think he's so fucking funny. Everything he does, he has a way of captivating you and getting you interested in it. I've always been a sports fan. I love basketball, football, soccer, all that stuff. But I watched football, right? But I never really, I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, I knew everything. I knew the basics and probably a little bit more than like an average fan, but nowhere near like a knowledgeable fan. Like, obviously wrestling is the sport, which I will call it, that I know most about. Because that's just what I was always passionate in, and that's what captivated me at an earlier age, more so than just the business and the stories with wrestling. But with football, Pat just has a way, if you watch his YouTube shows, of kind of like teaching you and filling you in on why things happen the way they do and giving you insight. And it's just, you just have to check it out. I would definitely recommend checking out his show. But the fact that he's getting Vince in studio, and the fact that it's happening so soon after the Brock Lesnar in studio interview that he did, which again I would recommend checking out the video if you're able to on YouTube, because the video version is so much better. Brock is just, he shows himself in that interview, and I'm pretty sure I touched on it last week, so I won't get too in depth here. But it's just Pat's interview style is very cool, and he has a way of keeping it professional, you know, in some ways. Although a lot of people would say he doesn't, but he asks the questions, but he has a cool way and a fun, laid back way of doing it. So I just for the interview and the idea of the interview itself, I'm super stoked, and I'm so bummed I'm going to be working. I wish I could. Maybe I'm going to try to see if I can schedule my break around that time. But regardless, I'll be checking it out later on. But a lot of speculation coming and surrounding this interview itself is this going to be a setup for a WrestleMania match or moment? Personally, I don't see Vince. He's what, 76 now. I don't see him wrestling a match. He barely wants to be on TV now as it is. You know, granted, he is doing the stuff with Austin Theory, which we'll touch on a little bit more in a second, but I don't think he's going to be wrestling. You know, I think that's a little far-fetched. If that happens, then I will admit to being wrong, and we'll talk about it then. You know what I mean? But I don't see Vince himself wrestling. I feel like if this is going to be setting up, and if the idea to do this interview is to be the starting point for a WrestleMania match, I don't see it being with Vince necessarily. So I'm not in that ballpark. And again, if I'm wrong, we'll talk about it then, and I will admit to being wrong. But I don't see Vince wrestling at 76. I don't see it, and especially against Pat McAfee. Now, say what you want about Pat again, but he is super talented, super athletic. The dude can go, and he's one of those, I guess, celebrities, if you want to call him that, but outside personalities, I'll say, who came into the wrestling world and who took it seriously. He's obviously a big fan, and of course he's a commentator on SmackDown now, but a few years ago, back in the NXT days, NXT Black and Gold days, you know, it's so sad to think about that, but won't get into that right now. The story and the match that he had with Adam Cole, you know, and of course, Adam Cole is in a completely different class than everyone we're talking about here in ring-wise, but Pat McAfee held his own, you know, in that singles match with Adam Cole. I believe that was NXT TakeOver 30, if I'm not mistaken. And then the War Games match that he had later on. And the insane move, I believe it was a swanton that he did off the top of the cage. This dude is fearless, and he doesn't do anything half-assed. So if this is leading to a match that he's going to be involved in, I think he's going to hold his own, and I think he's going to take it seriously. And just like with that match, I had watched an interview actually not too long ago. He had a ring delivered to his studio, so he was training and doing what he had to do on his I don't want to say spare time, but you know, he takes it seriously. So I don't think it's going to be a shit show. I'll put it that way. But saying all that, I don't think he's the ideal opponent for a Vince McMahon. You know what I mean? Unless it was going to be like a hardcore match or something crazy like that. But I don't see that being a good pairing. So that's why I'm in the ballpark of this ain't happening with Vince being the opponent. Now, I could see him being at ringside or the special referee or something like that, but not as the actual opponent. Now, again, I'm not going to really get into too much speculation or too many theories regarding Pat McAfee versus X, Y, and Z until we see the interview itself, right? This could just be an actual interview, and everyone could be kind of blowing this out of proportion, and with the reports saying that there's nothing being left off the table with WrestleMania, then who knows? Like, I wouldn't put it past them for bringing it up, and I mean, it sounds crazy, but, you know, then again, it doesn't, you know, that I think it's a good thing, and a lot of people can view the fact that, oh, everything's on the table as a bad thing, but to me, I kind of view it as a positive. I think that's what you want, especially with a WrestleMania, but why would you want a closed-mind approach to something, you know, especially with wrestling? Like, you literally have an open canvas to do whatever you want in the world of wrestling, so why would you limit what can be put on the table? So, I don't know. The fact that a lot of people are kind of viewing that as a desperation ploy or something like that. Now, you know, certain things that are just completely unrealistic, that's one thing, you know what I mean? But I think anything should be entertained, and I think if it's a thought, you should bring it up, you know, and if it's stupid, or I'm not gonna say stupid, there's no stupid thoughts, but I will say if it's, I guess I'll stick with unreal, right? Like if you're doing like, and one thing that I heard was like a Hulk Hogan versus Linda McMahon thing, and it's like, come on now, like that, I don't, come on, just gonna leave that at that. Like that is something where the second that left someone's mouth, you'd be like, fuck no, that's not happening, and move on to the next. Simple as that, you know what I mean? But I think when you get to the point where you're limiting, or yeah, just limiting what you can bring to the table, then you're limiting the whole role and the whole creative writer role, and that's counterproductive. So that's a whole nother maybe topic that we could dive into, the creative writing position in WWE, maybe on a different show. But today we got a lot of topics here. But I don't think the drawing power here, or the topic should be Vince in the ring. I think if you want Pat in the ring and it's going to be Pat versus someone, then you can entertain someone like an Austin Theory, right? Which would kind of make sense. I don't really know exactly the story yet, which is why we have to wait and see what this interview or this segment is going to entail on this coming Thursday. But I think obviously your best bet and your best representative, especially with Shane being on the outs, for Vince McMahon and the McMahon family, is an Austin Theory. So I think that could be a fun match. I think Austin Theory is very good in the ring, especially with what he's been doing in his showcases the past 6-8 months now, however long he's. I would combine his main roster run with his NXT run too, because I think that was the start of his personality for sure, and I think he did have a good amount of moments in NXT, being involved with the Way and Johnny Gargano and everything like that. So I think a combination of that, and of course what he's done on Raw lately, I could see him going up against Pat, and I could see that being a pretty good match. And again, I could see he being the representative of Vince, and that's how you get Vince out there. If the idea is Vince McMahon is a drawing power, which, say what you want, but he is, If Vince says he's going to be on Raw, you're going to have people tuning in to see what he's saying, regardless of whether it was something monumental or something that was pretty irrelevant. Like, people are going to tune in just to see what he's doing, especially nowadays. So I think that's a way to get him ringside, or being the special ref, depending on what the story is at that point. But I think if you're looking for a McMahon representative with the players that we have involved, Theory is probably your best bet. Now, one that could be completely out of left field, and hear me out on this one again, could be Cody Rhodes. As crazy as that sounds, I could see Vince bringing Cody in, and Cody possibly playing that role, as ludicrous as that sounds. But again, give me a second and hear me out. Pat recently on his show, sometime last week I believe it was, downplayed Cody coming back into WWE, and pretty much framed it as it not being a big deal, and said him and his friends started something that wasn't very good, and how NXT had beat them a couple times and all that. So first of all, the fact that he even mentioned it on his show is something, because no one else in WWE world has mentioned it specifically in his name. We of course have gotten the passing references to Cody, but nothing specific with his name. So the fact that he brought that up, and again, Pat can do what he wants on his show, and that's for certain, but I don't think that was just done out of nowhere and for no reason. So that kind of stood out to me. And also just the fact that Vince is bringing Cody back in, Cody could frame it, and as now, again, why I said this is crazy is because while I'm a obviously fan of Pat McAfee, I don't see this being maybe the first thing that you want to have Cody do on his big return, especially having his first return Mania match being against Pat McAfee. Again, no disrespect to Pat, but I don't really see that being a big a big enough deal, which is why I think it's this theory and this idea is very, very much out of left field. But just throwing it out there because Pat did bring Cody up, and obviously the rumors with Cody are still out there. So that was just another idea that kind of popped into my head that I did speculate on. So I just kind of wanted to throw out there. And again, as always, let me know what you guys think. You can definitely let me know on Twitter at ASHMANNS or at the show's Twitter page at kickashpodcast_. But again, just a crazy theory that I just had to at least put out into the universe and see. So if for whatever weird situation happens that it does play out, I can at least reference this episode, and kind of go off of that. But again, that was something else I wanted to get your guys' insight on. But the fact that this interview with VKM, Vince McMahon, is even happening next week is a pretty big deal. So I'm looking forward to it. And again, if it doesn't lead to anything WrestleMania moment or match related, I'm totally good with that. But just the fact that that theory, no pun intended, is even being thrown out there, we of course had to bring it up here. Again, speaking of Cody, no major developments have happened this past week outside of the references we have gotten on Raw from The Miz referencing the whole dashing comment, and then we did get a hint from Edge himself during his promo, which was very well done. I think it's pretty safe to say Edge is probably the best promo, at least on Raw, but maybe in WWE at this point. He just the passion and the feeling that he evokes and brings with his segments are just at top level, and I encourage you to always try to make it a point if you don't watch Raw for the whole 3-hour show, which I totally get. But if you miss Edge's promos, do what you can to check them out. They're maybe a few minutes at most, but they're always pretty impactful, at least in my opinion. But it was pretty interesting, in my opinion, that Edge referenced Cody, and I think that could be a fun match too, and I think there's a lot of history that they could play off of, and I think Edge is obviously one of the best storytellers that we have in wrestling right now, especially on the mic. So I think that could be a fun possibility and a fun potential Cody match at WrestleMania if we're trying to go down the route to figure out what Cody is going to do at WrestleMania. If the idea is to bring him back in time for Mania, I still think you may want to hold off and have him debut on the Raw after Mania, but again, we'll kind of dive into that once we get closer to WrestleMania itself. But it was fun that we at least had a small reference there. But my opinion, I think the Edge match that we will be getting at WrestleMania, and I hope that we get at WrestleMania, is against AJ Styles. And before I kind of comment further, I will say shout out to AJ Styles. He recently renewed his contract with WWE. I don't know the exact amount of years, but it is stated that he is getting about $3 million per year. And if that's the case, then fucking right, man, get your bag. And I'm so happy. AJ is one of those guys who put in his work and his time on the indies and literally traveled the world building his brand and building the character and building who he is as a wrestler and putting on just banger after banger wherever he went. So if he is getting the $3 million, whatever he's getting, I hope he's getting paid. I'll put it that way, and I hope it is the $3 million because that dude deserves it, and then probably some. So shout out to him if that's the case. But I would love to see, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here. I'm sure the majority of people actually would love to see an Edge and AJ Styles match again. These two guys, it doesn't even have to be some heated rivalry or anything like that. It just has to be these two guys, right? Like, these two can sell you air, it seems. And I think just the fact that they're going to want to prove to each other that they're the best and they're phenomenal and whatever keyword that they're going to use in the build up to it, I think that sells itself. And obviously just these two guys being these two guys sells the match. So I think that that's the route that we're going to go. But I think if it's not for whatever reason, I think Cody and Edge could be fun too. But again, I'm still not in the camp that we're getting a Cody Mania match. And again, I could be easily, or I'm not going to say easily swayed, but more swayed on that one than some other theories that are out there. But I'm definitely in the ballpark of hoping that we get Edge and Styles at Mania this year. Staying on the Mania topic, though, for a little bit while we are talking about it, there has been a little bit of updates that have come out this week as well regarding the respective nights. Since, as we all know, WrestleMania is a 2-night affair this year, which I, again, am a big fan of. I think that's cool. I was one of the people in attendance for WrestleMania 35 and the shit show that the end of the night ended up being. But I that's a story for a different podcast. I ended up getting very lucky in a interesting way, which I'll again touch on at a different date. But I like the 2-night feel. I like the weekend event, right? The whole, and especially since we don't have a big takeover, like, and we may end up getting an NXT show, right? But not the takeovers that we used to get, especially in like a NXT takeover Brooklyn or anything like that, where it's a big arena event. So if we're not going to have that, then you might as well make it a long weekend event. And I think between that and just the time that you save and how you break it up, I don't care what it is. Like a 6-7 hour plus event is tiring no matter where you are, especially if you're on site there and you have the trip back and everything. So I think having it at 2 nights with it being probably about 3.5 hours, you can even get away with pushing it to 4. And depending on what time the doors open and everything like that, because that's another thing you have to keep in mind of as well. Like the doors open a lot of times, especially for a big event like this, 2 hours in advance. So you have to add that into the time that people are there and all that stuff. So I'm a big fan of the 2-night event. But with that being said, we do, like I said, have news on the respective cards. WrestleMania Night 1 so far has been slated with the SmackDown Women's Championship match. Of course, that is your champion being Charlotte Flair, defending against the 2022 Women's Royal Rumble winner being Ronda Rousey. Again, I still have mixed feelings about this, but we're not going to get into that here right now. I have touched on that in the past, and for sure I will touch on it as we get closer to WrestleMania and as we see this story play out more. But that is slated for night 1, and for night 2 we have Roman Reigns, obviously being your Universal Champion, defending against the WWE Heavyweight Champion Brock Lesnar in what they have officially labeled as a winner-take-all championship unification match. As we, like, could we add any more words to this title, like, to this match description? Like, Jesus. But that's a whole nother topic. And I believe Matt posted on Twitter, I forget the exact framing, but he had kind of quipped on the fact that whoever wins this unification match, like, the championship name itself is probably going to have, like, 8 words just to say you're, like, the reigning, defending world heavyweight undisputed universal champion or some shit like that. And I dread what the actual name of the champion going forward is going to be, because WWE can't help themselves but make it sound the most stupendous that it can, right? So that's a whole other topic again, but the fact that this is a unification match now, I think, is very intriguing. They haven't really dived deeper into what that means for the respective rosters going forward. Of course, that being Raw and SmackDown, and if they're going to remain solely on their same brand that they were drafted to, or if they're going to kind of be more fluid now, and if, like, your Rhea Ripley's can show up on SmackDown or in things like that. So I don't know, like, I think that's pretty intriguing, and I think it's cool that they're actually bold enough to go that route, and I'm not going to say I'm excited, because in a way, with having a lot of pros, there's some cons too, because I liked having the second champion being there on that separate show, because it gave more opportunity for, like, your Big E's and your Kofi Kingstons and guys like that. And I don't know, I'm going to wait and see on this, but I think it is pretty telling that they are officially labeling it as a unification match, amongst 15 other words that I didn't say right there. But yeah, so I think this match is going to be pretty stellar too. I don't think it's just going to be like suplex, spear, Superman punch, and then we're done. At least I hope not. I think we're going to get a good match out of this, and especially with the version of Lesnar that we've gotten lately. I think he's going to want to definitely not prove himself, but definitely build this match up and deliver. So I think obviously Reigns is as well. So I think this is going to be a stellar match. But yeah, with it being a unification match, it's pretty intriguing, and kudos to them for actually pulling the trigger on that. One last thing on Mania before I move on to the AEW world, but we still do have Kevin Owens, good old KO, shitting on Texas, especially on Twitter and on, of course, Monday Night Raw. But if you're on Twitter and you're not following Kevin, then right now it's pretty fun because he'll bring up moments and then he'll say, "Too bad it happened in the, well, not shithole, but in this place of Texas," and stuff like that. But Kevin Owens is always a fun follow, especially on Twitter, but and Instagram as well. But with Kevin Owens still shitting on Texas, I think it's obvious we're getting some type of Stone Cold Steve Austin, I don't want to say interference, but altercation at Mania. But again, I'm not sold that we're getting this match either, like an actual full-fledged match, KO versus Austin. I kind of see it, especially with the way things have been happening on Raw lately. If we don't get, and I guess I'll sidebar this right now, if we don't get a Seth Rollins versus Cody match, and again, I keep going back to Cody, but if they are pressed to get Cody on Mania, I could see them maybe wanting to do a one-on-one match with Rollins and Cody. I guess I probably should have said Rollins and Rhodes. That would have been more fitting, but you guys know what I mean. I think that you could, again, build and play off a lot of history with that. I don't know. I'm not going to get into it right now because as I'm sitting here thinking of it, man, there's just so many different routes you could go with that story. But again, I think if you're not going to have that singles match, I think the way that they're going right now, to me, kind of looks like you're going to have a KO and Rollins teaming against whoever the Raw Tag Team Champions will be at that time, which hopefully will be the Alpha Academy. I hope they get that moment, because then that would mean that probably at that point RKO or RK Bro rather have broken up, and whoever has turned on whoever, and they're gonna have that singles match, because I think that could be a good kick-ass match too. Riddle versus Orton, like, yes please. So I think that could be a fun match, and I could see that being I could honestly see that being like the opening match on Mania Night 1 if they go that route. So again, we'll definitely get into WrestleMania as we get closer and we get a better idea of the card itself. But I think what I was getting to is, regardless of who the tag team champs are at that point, I could see at the end of that match, whether Seth and Kevin end up winning or losing that match, I could see Austin making his return, I guess, and coming in and just, first of all, just hearing that glass break is going to be so fun, and to see the reaction that he's going to get, like, oh, man, just kind of gives you goosebumps just thinking about it. But I can kind of see that moment happening then, and then Austin, of course, hitting the stunner on Kevin, and probably Rollins as well, and it just being that. But I think that's all you need, right? And to me, that's kind of what I would prefer. No offense to Austin, but I think he's good, and he has stated he's good. So I don't feel like this is something that he has to come back for in ring wise. So look, I think people are getting kind of greedy with, like, clamoring for his in-ring return. And yeah, this was X amount of years ago, maybe, but I kind of take peace in knowing that he has taken peace with his in-ring career being over with. So I don't think the pressure should be on him returning. I think, hey, it being in Texas, us just getting an Austin moment in and of itself is going to be dope. So I'm good with that. But diving into the AEW world now, they have had another week of what in my mind, were fire promos and progression on the road to WrestleMania, on the road to Revolution, which is super special for me because I will be on site for the pay-per-view, which is mind-blowing to think that it's only a week away at this point. And just the lineup and the card that we have for the Revolution itself, I just feel so lucky and just so, like, just blessed to be able to go, and with how close it is and everything, like, I couldn't have asked for a better situation. So I apologize for any biasness I may have with the card going forward, but I say all that because with everything happening next week, I of course will have my on-site and in-person perspective, and I hope to kind of break down everything that I attend rather, and kind of have its own show, right? Obviously a review show for Revolution itself, but I'm going to be going to the Fan Fest and a few other events and little shows that are happening in the area with AEW talent, so that's going to be pretty cool too. So I definitely hope to have multiple shows out for you guys next weekend, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But we're getting into AEW here now. Tony Khan has stated that there is another big surprise similar to The Last Dance. In that regard, I guess and I don't know if when he says that, if he means with it being a specific talent or with just the level and the magnitude that it was bringing CM Punk back to wrestling. However, he stated that he also is under an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, but he hopes to make the announcement sometime this coming Wednesday on Dynamite. So who knows what that could be, right? There's a whole bunch of speculation, whether it's him buying ROH's tape library or bringing in a huge talent or them going over and having their first UK show or something like that, or a streaming deal. It could be like a number of different things, right? Or some type of partnership with New Japan. I think it could be obviously a number of things, right? And it could be a combination of things. So again, I think we could spend a whole show here speculating on what he's up to right now, but I'm gonna kind of hold out and see how Wednesday plays out and see what the announcement is, and if we get the full-fledged announcement on Wednesday, and then of course we'll be talking about it then. But Tony Khan is at it again, man. He's always up to something, which I think is cool. That shows he's always thinking forward, and obviously, with him being in the position that he is in various projects and roles, it's not surprising, but it's just cool to see that someone who's a fan just like us is doing all these monumental things for AEW, and it's just reassuring too that they're going to be around for the long haul. So definitely excited to see what that is. But another outside of the ring for AEW news, we have Brian Cage re-signing a deal with AEW, which, to be honest, was a bit of a surprise, just with, I guess, some disgruntled comments that I believe it was his wife that had made on Twitter, or just referenced that he should be getting pushed more or should be in a different spot on the card. And that, again, which I feel like I've said a lot here, sorry guys, but that's a whole other subject and whole other topic in and of itself, which, if depending on who you are, if you're a big fan, you could be like, hell yeah, he should be X, Y, and Z, or he should have been a champion by now. If you're not really a big fan of his, you could say he's where he should be. So I'm not really going to get into that right now, but the fact that he has resigned shows that they have worked out whatever, I don't want to say issues, because I don't know if there were issues, but they've worked out obviously an agreement, and they're both on the same page, both sides rather. So that's cool to see, and I'm happy for that, and I hope we do get a push for Cage. I think he is a force, and his look alone is something else. So I think, especially with all the other big guy talent that we have with AEW now on the roster, I feel like he kind of fits in with that whole division in and of itself. So that's definitely cool to see. But we did have the inclusion of Buddy Matthews as well, along with Shane Strickland, which Shane Strickland I think is such a good sliding, and I think was kind of a no-brainer in and of itself as well. So I can't wait to see whether he's making his debut at Revolution, which of course obviously I would be super stoked for, or if he holds out into the week after or whatever. But definitely a good pickup for AEW, and I'm definitely excited to see what he brings and what he adds to of course, the shows, the on-air shows each week, but with everything else that he does outside of the ring. I think that he can just do a lot for the company in and of itself, so very excited for that, and good pickup by TK of Shane Strickland on that one. And I think that was a no-brainer too, but like I said, I at first thought he may try to play the indie scene, and not play in that respect, but like just hit up as many shows as he can and then lock down a contract. But I think then again too, like if you have something presented in front of you and it's exciting and it's the level of an AEW, then you'd kind of be foolish not to, you know what I mean? So good signing there, and I'm, again, excited to see how that plays out. Dynamite, like I said, has been on a roll lately with its in-ring promo segments, and while I won't be doing a match-by-match rundown of both shows this week, sadly, just based on time, but I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the big topics coming from the shows this week, because, I mean, saying no more with besides just saying MJF, right? Like, this guy, each week, he just brings it, and it seems natural to him, which is scary because he's so young, and for whatever reason, I guess there's a lot of reasons rather, but MJF to me kind of reminds me, and of course at a more advanced promo for sure, but even higher than a Randy Orton, but he reminds me of Randy Orton when he first started out, and when Randy Orton was 24 and became the youngest world heavyweight champion, and by defeating Chris Benoit. It was a big deal, and while the babyface route for Randy Orton when he became the champion probably wasn't the best path for him, it was a good starting point. And while I say that, I think MJF is obviously at a higher level than Randy Orton was. Now, I would love to have seen what a 24-year-old unfiltered and almost no holds barred on the mic Randy Orton could have been on the mic, because especially if you hear stories, and from what Randy Orton has said about himself, like, he was an asshole, he was a douchebag. So to hear or to be witness to what Randy could have done on the mic and at that age with that mindset, maybe it's a good idea, that the roles weren't reversed, I should say. But I think that for whatever reason, MJF is just reminding me of that run in Randy Orton's career. Obviously turned up by 10, because MJF he's just so good. And I think the main thing that kind of stands out to me comparison-wise to Randy Orton is just how natural, like I said, it comes to him. And the weird thing is Randy Orton, of course, is a third-generation wrestler. MJF isn't. He's the first, which is crazy again. There's just so many things, and maybe I'll break it down and put more thought into it, but I had thought about it in the past, but as I'm sitting here talking about it right now to you guys, I kind of am more intrigued by the comparison, so I may make a note to look into that further at a later point. But the promo that MJF did this week, and how he told his story and gave the history of himself and the MJF origin, really, and the starting point of his attitude and why he is the way he is, and blaming it on Punk. And he blamed it on Punk, but he blamed it on him in a way that made you feel for him. And I sent out a tweet, I think either during or right after the segment it ended, that, like, man, like, I'm in my feelings now. Like, this dude has me feeling like, man, like, I don't want to see Punk beat his ass in a dog collar match. Like, I feel bad for him. Like, not that I want to protect him, but, like, I kind of feel for him. So, and the fact that he has me feeling that way makes me feel even more shitty about myself, because I know it's going to be a slap in the face when he comes out and shows that it was all an act, and that, yeah, that shit may have happened, but it didn't affect him the way it really did, or he didn't really go through that shit and it was all a lie. Like, I don't know, but the way that he presented it, and the emotion and the story and the story that he laid out, the beginning, middle, and the end, and then how they ended it was so perfect, with having Punk just come out, again, no music, he came out, no mic, no nothing, got into the ring, asked MJF if it was real, and at that point MJF was definitely teary-eyed and had a tear rolling down his cheek, and he said yes, it was real, and he left the ring and just walked to the back. And so now we're kind of conflicted, because it's like, well, shit, like, if Punk is the reason in MJF's mind, that if Punk quitting however many years ago at this point, and that really affecting MJF, and that's what started the downward spiral for MJF, and the shitty attitude, and him being bitter against the world and wanting to prove that he's better than everyone, and all that shit, like, in a way it kind of makes sense, and that's what kind of gives me, at least, like, a mind fuck. It's like, well, man, like, now I don't know how to feel. Like, I'm mad at MJF because he has me feeling conflicted for him, and that's so perfect, and that's so, like, beautiful and so well done. So I was definitely in the camp of like, oh man, did they start this story too soon? And since we've already had the actual one-on-one match, do we even need a follow-up? And not as heavy as some people, but just like, because obviously I'm a huge fan of both these guys, but I understood where some people were coming from, but I was still in the camp of, for sure, like, this can play out for almost as long as they needed to, right? And I think, and part of me even wonders if we're going to get the culmination at Revolution. I can kind of see, part of me thinks that I can kind of see MJF playing up this whole sympathy route to Revolution, and so that way Punk isn't as pissed off and as hungry to hurt, physically, like, brutalize MJF. So I think that may be why in MJF's mind and his game plan was, let me go out here and tell this sob story, right? Get in everyone's heart, get in their minds, especially Punk's. Have him coming out there feeling like, oh man, am I a piece of shit for wanting to beat this guy's ass in a dog collar match? And I'm truly the reason that he's like this, you know? Like, Punk could be maybe second guessing himself in the decision that he made, and I think that could be perfect for MJF. I think that could be the perfect mindset that MJF wants out there if they're going to go that route, and I think that that's very, very possible. And I think if that is the case, then I wouldn't be surprised to see MJF win here, and that being it. But at the same time too, I don't know if they really want Punk losing back-to-back to MJF, especially with this being a dog collar match. Like, I don't know if Wardlow, let's say, were to interfere, if that would be kind of maybe, I don't want to say taking the easy way out, but kind of redoing the same finish that we already saw. So I think the ending of this match is going to be very interesting itself, because it'll I think be pretty obvious at that point whether we're going to get a part 3 to all this, or if this is going to be the ending point for now. But to me, I kind of feel like this is going to be MJF taking the W here. As I don't know if it's crazy, but I don't know. Like, I'm still kind of 50-50 on this one. Maybe 60-40, I guess I should say, leaning towards MJF winning. But I think if he does win, it's going to be because he went the sympathy route, and Punk is going to be pissed off at himself for believing in MJF's BS. And yeah, so that's why I say all that, because I say that because then I'm like, well, if that happens, then we definitely need a part 3, because then Punk's going to be even more mad for believing in MJF. So I don't know, guys. That's a whole other cluster in and of itself. So, and I think that's good. I think that's exactly what wrestling needs, and that's the whole point of wrestling, and the whole point of storylines and stuff. So I'm not going to give my official prediction here. I'm going to take the easy way out because this isn't the actual prediction show, but if I had to right now, I'm kind of leaning more towards MJF getting the W in their match at Revolution. Later on, we had the, I think, show-stealing segment almost with Kingston and Jericho. And when I say almost show-stealing, is because of Eddie Kingston, man. Like, I don't know what it is exactly. I can't really put my finger on it, but I just love me some Eddie Kingston. First of all, the man, his face is beautiful, and I think he really missed his calling as a model. Like, maybe I'm just, like, weird and crazy and out there, but, like, the dude's face is just beautiful. He has beautiful eyes, beautiful eyebrows. It's just, like, I'm kind of jealous, I'm not gonna lie. But shout out to him and his face, you know. I just had to start off with that. But this guy just stole the segment for me this week, and to say that when he's going up against Chris Jericho, that Jericho wasn't the one in a promo battle, maybe, you know, not battle, but like in a promo, that Jericho didn't win the segment itself, is just, it speaks volumes to who you are and what you're doing on your mic. So I'm not going to say it's surprising, but again, it's just another confirmation to me in my mind that Eddie Kingston is the man. And I think that, to me, I'm not going to say a negative to having so much talent, because there's never a negative to having talent, but I kind of wish that Eddie Kingston, like, would have a better chance at the heavyweight title. Like, I think he could be a great face of the company, his story and everything, especially what he's done this past year. Like, there's just something about him I think that you could really just give the ball with and hit a home run with that guy. So again, I'm just a big fan of Eddie Kingston, and I'm definitely looking forward to their one-on-one match that we're getting at Revolution, which was the outcome of this segment that they had here. But this segment, again, is one that you definitely need to take some time out of your day and watch. Jericho pretty much said that Kingston isn't on his level, and he didn't even know who Kingston was when he was first coming into the company, and how when he first heard of Eddie Kingston, he thought that they meant Eddie Edwards and stuff like that. And Jericho hit, I'm not going to say low points, but he kind of hit the checklist, right? Like, he kind of referenced Eddie's past, he referenced his family, he referenced not going to the big leagues, and how by the age of whatever, Jericho had already main evented pay-per-views, big events, sold out arenas, been champion, and all that shit, and Eddie wasn't. And Eddie had mentioned, the only reason Jericho was headlining all of that was because Kingston wasn't there, which, it is what it is. To me, I think it's fun to see Jericho kind of be in this role and in this position, especially with a Kingston going on the other side, because Jericho knows what buttons to push. And he's one of the masters of that, right? Like, in a good way. His character, he always knows what buttons to push on the mic, and especially with the freedom they have in AEW, and especially with it being a Kingston, and not that Kingston is a hothead, but was just how free and in himself and comfortable with himself that he is, and how he said that he's going to do shit his way, and you believe that, you hear that, you look at him and you know that. So just the pairing of this and these two guys together is ideal for me, and I hope we get one more segment before we get to Revolution, with these guys going back and forth, or at least like a backstage sit down with JR. Like, I think that would be so fun to have, or maybe not fun, but just so insightful and fun too. But I think that would be, it's just one of those things where it's kind of like main event, right? You get that main event feel, especially with it being done by JR. And I think that's the perfect setting. Just have a backstage sit down that it can last maybe 2 minutes, right? And if I would love to see it on Dynamite, but I know they're going to be pressed for time with it being the go home show. But they're having that countdown to Revolution show, I believe, directly after Rampage next Friday. So even if you have to hold that segment hold it for the countdown show, I just hope we get it. And I hope, first of all, we get it. And I hope that we get it on TV. Or if it's on YouTube, fine. But I just hope we at least get that segment, because I feel like that could, with having JR there to narrate the two, and they're both going to show respect to JR, and it's not going to get physical. So I just think that'd be the perfect setting. But Kingston, man, and for the record, I will make my prediction here. I'm not going to back out of this one, guys. I see Kingston taking the W. I think this is almost a layup. And again, I wish we would have gotten maybe another week too of build up, just because I feel like these guys can really pull so much out of each other, promo wise, like verbally, I guess I should say. There's just so much, but I think Kingston needs the W here, and I think it's going to be a big deal for Kingston, whereas Jericho can take the L, and maybe him taking the L here will be the starting point for a new character direction for himself, maybe more of a bad guy route, or he's going to maybe take some time off, because it's getting kind of crowded, and he, I think, deserves a little bit of time off too. I know he was just gone a little bit ago, but right now, there's nothing pressing, right? With Inner Circle being disbanded and everyone kind of doing their own thing in that respect. And Jake Hager, I don't really know what he's doing in AEW. So I think this is kind of like the perfect time to have, or at least maybe nothing on screen, right? Like, if you don't want him to completely disappear, then just have him continue to do commentary on Rampage and do like a few like stuff like that, but nothing major on screen. So I think you could kind of do that and have him back off a bit. Unless there's something else that I'm just not thinking of that he can dive right into. But that's kind of where I see that going for right now. But the other promo that I wanted to kind of touch on before we wrap up here, because the show is going long, sorry about that, guys, but I appreciate you hanging in with me as always, was the contract signing between Thunder Rosa and Dr. Britt Baker, DMD. I think in this segment, Dr. Britt kind of stole the show with this one, in so to speak. I think to me, it's super impactful, especially for when a heel says something that's true, because it really makes you that much more invested in the story itself. And I think everything, obviously, that Dr. Britt Baker said was true. That, yes, Thunder Rosa may have technically won the Lights Out match that they had, even though it wasn't an official match. But everyone was talking about Britt, right? Everyone was talking about her. She got the t-shirt, which I bought as well. But she was the star that was made, and no disrespect to Thunder Rosa. And now, granted, in all fairness, Thunder Rosa still wasn't even an employee or a signed talent. I don't know how they're classified in AEW, but I'm pretty sure they're still independent contractors as well. But regardless, she was still signed under a contract to NWA. So if I'm Tony Khan, I'm gonna be respectful and push you and build you, because I obviously have faith in, I have you in my company for a reason, going against top talent for a reason. But I'm going to protect my own, and in that case, it was Britt Baker. And at this point now, things have changed, right? Thunder Rosa is officially signed with AEW, and they've been doing a nice job with her. I think she maybe could have gotten a little bit of a more focused push leading up to the Revolution match. But I think what they've done was nice, and everything, especially recently with Mercedes Martinez coming in, I think that was a nice inclusion there. So I'm going to hold off on really giving a prediction on this one, because I'm still torn. But I really enjoyed this segment, and I think they laid it out perfectly. Thunder Rosa said her piece. Britt Baker said her piece. Excuse me. Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, said her piece. She, in my opinion, like I said, stole the segment here. And then I loved the touch that they had, and I was kind of waiting to see if they were going to do it in this order. But I love that Thunder Rosa waited for Britt to sign the contract and then jump the table, because I just feel like it would have been such a WWE thing for her to jump the table before Britt signed the contract. So then next week, Britt can say, oh, well, being the heel, right? Britt can say, oh, well, it's not official, I didn't sign, blah, 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 and just kind of just go a heelish route. But I love that Thunder Rosa was smart, as a babyface should be, waited for the contract to be signed, waited for the match to be official, and then did what she had to do, and did a perfect dive and clearance over that table, mind you, just so well done. But again, that was kind of my quick thoughts there. I apologize for not diving deep into the respective AEW shows this week, but with everything happening in the WWE world, I kind of wanted to give you guys a twofer in this show. So maybe, like I said, next week we'll definitely have more shows. But maybe sooner, after Dynamite airs next week, I can get a review show done. Since it's going to be a big week, but we'll see how next week goes, and I'll definitely be back with you guys in the next few days. But thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys again have had a stupendous weekend, and you guys take care and stay safe.